Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us on the official podcast of the M Network. I'm Tom Moslum, CEO. As you've probably heard, there have been headlines all over the news about the death of local news. We have local news is dying. What's killing it? Local news has been destroyed. Here's how we can revive it. And the AP coverage decline in local news outlets is accelerating despite efforts to help. Just yesterday, a group of nonprofits got together, philanthropic effort to help save the news industry. Even on their site, they say this vital public resource is at risk. So the question is, for guys like us in the marketing industry and our nonprofit clients who rely on public relations to get their word out because they don't have massive media budgets, if local news is dying, is public relations dying too? Joining me on the podcast is my very good friend, my once and future co-host and partner in crime, Tony Winton. Tony Winton is the president and editor-in-chief of the Miami Fourth Estate. They operate hyper-local nonprofit newsrooms, the Key Biscayne Independent and the Liberty City Independent, and maybe more on the way. Tony, thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it. You were at the Press Forward meeting yesterday. Tell me about that first, and then we'll get into the topic at hand.
Good to be with you again, Tom. And I always enjoy this. It's a flashback and a happy one. So good to be here. Thank you. Well, yeah, local news is in a lot of trouble, and Press Forward is a charitable collection being led by some of the nation's most respected and well-endowed nonprofit organizations, recognizing that American democracy is in crisis at the local level because of the absence of local news. The term that is used most often is news desert, meaning that, it's a wilderness and all the news sources have dried up. And so although we think of Miami, our area, as being rich media-wise with television stations and still a daily newspaper, the actual coverage at the local level, that's what we do, that's kind of basically disappeared. And so that is the aim of Press Forward, trying to figure out ways to revive local news.
Yeah, and full disclosure, one of our clients, the Miami Foundation, is spearheading that locally. But I bring it up because at the event yesterday, there was an undertone. While we're trying to save local news, it must mean local news is in real trouble. And that's because people have other choices. They're going to online, they're going to social media. TV ratings have been steadily declining. Newspaper readership is, as you know, in the larger newspapers falling off. And that raises questions for my nonprofit clients, my government agency clients, my foundations. These guys rely on getting the word out by doing PR. So if these are all dying mediums, is PR dead? Is there still reason for them to be going and pitching their stories to your reporters?
Right. So I guess your audience, the people who are people who are, I guess, media communications professionals. So as opposed to the general public, because these terms can kind of merge, right? Public relations versus public information officer.
Yep.
Versus, that kind of, they kind of overlap. And so in terms of standard public relations, yes, the roles have changed, and it's really if your audience as a public relations person is other news organizations trying to get coverage or alter coverage or change coverage, well, yeah, there are a few of them around now. So what do you do? That is a definite issue.
Well, with your organizations, you've got the Liberty City Independent and the Key Biscayne Independent. These are really hyper-local. They serve news deserts. Is there an opportunity with the smaller publications like yours as opposed to the big, giant regional publications? Because they're strapped for resources, and while you're strapped for resources too, you could cover more with fewer resources.
I would say there is, but like anything else, you kind of have to know who your audience is. Who are you talking to? What are they interested in, and what are they not interested in? Once you do that deep dive first, then you're going to have a much better uh, chance of success. So, for example, in my community, the ones that we do, when we get a press release saying this event is going to happen and it's in our neighborhood, well, then it's going to register. If I get a press release that comes for something that's happening 50 miles away, I'm not going to be interested in it. So, geo targeting is really important, making sure that it's going to the right place. And then thinking about, well, what would they need? What are the visuals going to be? How would I get a quote? How would I follow up if I can't get a reporter there? Is there a way to do a follow up interview? Thinking ahead, like I'm trying to put myself in the mind of an editor who might want to maybe give me some time or give me a space, but I need to make it work somehow with a minuscule budget. I have When I get pitches like that, and we're talking about a pitch, come and cover something. The ones that think ahead like that, they're much more likely to be successful. And I would say yes, we encourage them.
What about news content sharing or guest contributors? Is that something that smaller publications might be open to? Because I understand that you're hungry for content, and if it's appropriate, there may be synergies. So for the Key Biscayne Independent, there may be opportunities for organizations that deal, say, in environment or climate issues, because that's such a big deal on the Key. How does
Very
that
much
work?
so. Very much so. And that can range to, there's a couple of different ways that can happen, right? So one would be the standard, what we would call an opinion piece, or old days they'd call it an op-ed, because you'd be in opposition to the opinion piece of the publication. But an opinion piece, those are useful because you're getting it, particularly from people with some gravitas, who could write something intelligently that's got some facts mixed in it, making a persuasive argument. Those are always useful. They do go through a fact checking process, and those would be opinion pieces, so they get more review. Then, of course, there's something that's essentially sponsored content, where someone can essentially write something that looks like a news story, but it has a disclaimer. This is an advertisement. It's being paid for by so and so, and we've done those as well. And we've had some businesses say, "I want to promote my whatever it is, a restaurant or some kind of a service," and they can write about themselves. And it is an ad, but it's in the form of a news story.
Back to the main question, even when it comes to the larger organizations in our world, it's the Miami Herald, Telemundo, Univision, El Nuevo Herald, uh, Local 10, which just announced yesterday that they're dropping the ABC affiliation, and I imagine they're going to be an independent. This sends shockwaves. Are these all signs that the larger regional or larger local news organizations are in real trouble? Or do you think they're still viable concerns?
The larger, like say the Miami. I mean, I'm trying to say larger. Like, what do you mean?
Right, the
Or
TV stations and the like the Herald and the folks that cover Miami-Dade and Broward County and all of South Florida.
right? Everybody's got the same problem, and it maybe to different degrees and everything else. You have a highly fractured viewership where you're competing with someone watching a TikTok or an Instagram or a WhatsApp chat versus eyeballs that are going on to what you're doing, whether it's a TV story or a radio program. It's hyper fragmented. So every time that reduces the pie, that reduces the advertising, and it doesn't bring any more dollars into you. And they happen at different rates, but everyone's facing the same, I don't know, tidal wave that's sweeping over. It just hasn't hit you yet.
Yeah, for the PR folks, I think it makes it even more important to understand the target audiences that you're trying to reach and pick and choose the news outlets that reach that fragmented audience best. And so it might be a little more groundwork, but the payoff may be better.
I think very much so. Think about who you're trying to reach and what you're trying to do, rather than some generic thing. Like, for example, just in the last couple of weeks, the U.S. Navy has been writing to us pitching stories about this petty officer got this award or whatever it is. And that's the first time I've seen them get at least somewhat geo-targeting. They haven't had a hit yet. But if I get a release that says someone within 20 miles of our readership area or 15 miles, some young person who has done something and is serving our country, yeah, sure, we might look at that as a short little human interest story. And that's the kind of thing. If you could, it works for our bucket, which is hyper local, then these kinds of solicitations, pitches, whatever you want to call them, they're more likely to land.
What do you think is the biggest key for nonprofits to get your attention as a news publisher, editor in chief?
How does it affect the reader? What is the impact on the reader? If your goal is to, as a nonprofit, is I really want a story about something, then put yourself in the shoes of the editor or the writer who's going to be doing it, and they're going to want to know, how does it affect real people? What is the takeaway? Right? It isn't necessarily that you're doing something great. It's like you're doing something and it's really going to impact people, and here's why. Try to get to what we would call the nut graph. Try to get to it really quick, because the day is short, the work is heavy, and there isn't a lot of time to review your pitch.
And it may mean that the Key Biscayne Independent and the Liberty City Independent get different pitches on the same story because they're different audiences. And the Miami Herald gets a different pitch. And WFLR and WTVJ and WPLG get different pitches. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
A little bit, yeah, I would say. But there are commonalities. Like all of those organizations, we're going to need art, right? We're going to need some visual that's going to tell the story. And a lot of the pitches I get, they're like, some study is released by something. And I'm like, okay, well, how am I going to illustrate that? This is going to be something. I mean, I always, that's it. And whereas if someone says, we're going to have an event where we're going to show you some new thing, like a show and tell, those things always do well. And I'm even seeing more. I don't know how much is still happening, but I would say that even what they call the video news release, or I don't know if that's still something that's happening.
The VNRs.
Yeah. Those can get used if they're done correctly. I mean, you're trying to realize that the person who might be interested in your story doesn't have to. I have to hire a crew. I have to edit it. I have to do this. I have to do that. As long as you haven't done something goofy like, digitally mess with the images so that you've created something that is inauthentic, you got a good shot of getting that across.
Especially since organizations like yours are web driven, so that you don't have the same constraints of time that a TV station might have. You also do a podcast, as do many, many, many news organizations right now. They have podcasts. How important is it for nonprofit PR professionals to be looking out for relevant podcasts to try to get themselves on, or have their PR people get them on?
Right. I would say it's very relevant, and the type of podcast can matter. So our practice is, even though our podcast is somewhat geographically limited, it's aimed with the idea of writing a print story, online story afterward. So yes, there's a podcast, and if you're subscribing to our podcast, great, and you can share it and all that cool stuff. But it's also a story that's going to be part of our publication. So if you can deliver an element of news, make some news on the podcast, now your reach can last a lot longer, because it's living in more than one medium, if I'm making any sense.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm hearing is that local news is not dead. It's more relevant than ever. It's just more fractured, and the audiences that you're going to grab per outlet might be smaller, but that sounds like more opportunity for PR, not less.
I would say very much so. It's kind of standard, though, in this. If you understand a little bit about who you're talking to, where you're sending it, and rather than just blasting something out, well, maybe you'll get a few takers that way. But the more effort that you put into it, the better your chance is going to be. And I would point out that there is actually a hunger for it, right? People have new things to say. and information to convey. That's part of why we exist as a news organization. We look at it independently. We try to evaluate its news judgment, but it's not. I don't view it as an adversarial relationship. It's a relationship where both a public relations person and a news organization have, over time, they can establish some kind of trust factor and say, I really enjoy getting releases from this agency or whatever it is. They seem to really understand who we are, and I don't get bombarded with stuff I'm never going to do. But when they pitch me something, it's a gem.
Yeah, I mean, you and I, we tease each other quite a bit about this. But there is a relationship on commonality. And I find that as our agency, the M Network stands, we're the good guys. We don't lie. We don't spin. We don't tell fibs. We don't try to push stories and then change them. So our relationship with the media is based on, here's a story I think you're interested in. How can I help you tell it if you are interested? And then we sort of do the legwork and provide the resources for you. I'm not sure that's industry standard.
No, I've run into different. I mean, because remember, it's not just like there are people who do some of those functions that aren't agencies. They work for the government agencies, and they're trying to think ahead about coverage ideas. But I would say it's not. It's the minority approach. Let's put it that way. Most folks are not about being, quite frankly, especially in the government side, unhelpful.
Yeah, but they would be wise not to, because even when the story turns sour, if the news isn't good and you're still earnestly, honestly helpful to the news, that reporter is more likely to take your call down the road and when the story's not sour.
And I'll say something else. Even if you're in a position of like having to react to tough news, bad news, reporters calling you, just call them back and say, listen, I got your call. I just don't have anything for you. Just like I'm not ignoring you and not blowing you off. It's just, the minute I can get something, I'll let you know. But just like turning your email box off, not a good look.
Well, that's seldom stops the reporter from reporting. I couldn't get him on the phone, so I'm not going to run the story. That's happened never.
But what you're doing is, when you do have something to say, it's like just basic, dealing with folks as a thing. At some point, you are going to have to say something. You are going to have to communicate something, and you're going to want it to be more, you're going to encourage a receptive audience than one that's like, why should I even take your call? You haven't talked to me in 6 months. I have a press shop, and I don't want to use their name, but that works for a very prominent person in this community, and they've never responded. They just don't respond. And I'm like, okay, ever.
Right, which means that you're not going to take their call when they're trying to push a story that may be flattering.
Something happened where they absolutely wanted me to do something for them at some crazy hour of the night or something. And I'm like, of course I took their call, but it's just human nature. I don't know you. I've never spoken to you before. You're asking me to do all these things or whatever it is. There's no part of evaluating information in the news business is evaluating the source and credibility of who's talking to you. And if I don't know who you are, that automatically is like, well, we got to be super careful here.
Yeah. So relationships matter.
Part of human nature. Yeah.
Yeah. The relationships matter. The trust matters. Tony, how do we get in touch with you if my clients have a great story to pitch you that they don't want to go through us for, or if they just want to support you guys? Where do they find you?
Well, our website is www.kbindependent.org. That's our largest publication. We also have Liberty City Independent. The email address is info@kbindependent.org.
Tony, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. I know you are busy running around the city trying to cover the news. And I look forward to the next escapade, whether it be in a podcast form or elsewhere.
My pleasure. Thank you, Tom.